What up world, my name's Matt and I make videos on how to think better, do better, and be better. And today's a great day, so we're gonna make it count. Let's jump in. Oh, before I jump in, I just want to thank the new subscriber for joining. I'm now at 3 subscribers, which is pretty epic, and I just want you to know that I appreciate your support, so thanks for being here. If I were to try and simplify my worldview, I'd probably settle on 2 different topics. One is energy, and the other one is information. Humans are chemically powered biological processing machines that use information every day. If you're alive, you are taking in information. And this fact has been highlighted even more through the invention of the internet, which you can also call the superhighway of information. So let's get to why you're here, which is the advantage piece, I imagine. Because having better, faster, newer, and more accurate information allows you to get ahead. It gives the receiver of that information, if they use it appropriately, an advantage. As a competitive species, we're all looking for an edge, and we're driven by our genes, which I think are naturally very selfish. And when we turn information into knowledge, we create power. And power is having a relative advantage. This is why big data is so huge today, because everyone is looking for that edge. And who gets ahead in this world is determined by who understands that information and can do something constructive with it. And to start off with, I consider information different than knowledge. And this is especially true in a world full of misinformation. Information is neither right or wrong, it just is. When we're able to look at information objectively, I think we can discover knowledge. Part 1 of my information theory mental model is inputs and quality. Information comes into your head through your senses that act as input mechanisms. Your brain takes in that information and converts it, processes it into the reality that you're experiencing. Without our senses, we'd have no reality. And different living things have different sensory inputs. Not all inputs are created equal, and that's I think what makes it so interesting. Because clearly, some of the senses that we've been given have given us an evolutionary advantage. What I find particularly interesting is that through the invention of computers and code and everything like that, where humans are limited by the volume of information they can take into a certain biological set limit, computers are very scalable. And if we can improve the inputs into them, we can have almost like a superhuman ability to manage that information. And once we've inputted that information, what's important is quality control. We want to make sure what we're getting is good. Now, how you define good is up to you. I mean, if you're someone that searches for something scientific or a more objective truth, then I would say that your quality of information is better. The one thing I would say to be careful of is misinformation, you know? I think that misinformation can be worse than no information, because misinformation or the wrong information can be a time suck. And you don't want to be going down the wrong thread when it's not going to get you to where you want to go. In a world full of easily accessible minds, misinformation really is a weapon of mass destruction, let alone just a distraction. Because misinformation may be false, but if enough people believe it, then it almost becomes true. And misinformation, to me, is an information disadvantage if you're the one holding it. But if you're someone that's using it to manipulate, then that is your advantage. And that's why teaching people critical thinking and thinking for yourself is so important. But it's challenging, and as much as I like to think that I think for myself, there's definitely many times where I'm not. The key is to become aware of these times through self-reflection, and I use that as part of my mental model. I believe one of the most important parts of society is how we educate each other, because one of the most important parts about the input section is the source of the information. And so every once in a while, it's good to take an inventory on where are you getting your information from. Our educational institutions are one of the biggest providers of information to young learners and older learners too. And this is why I think that educational institutions are so important for society. They're literally the source of information that's shaping the minds of the future. And so if I'm basing my simplified worldview on 2 things, and one of them is information, and we spend so much of our time in educational institutions, then it's absolutely critical we get that right. And one of the ways to make sure you're getting a good education is through self-learning. And if you're fortunate enough to be watching this video, well, first thanks, but you're fortunate enough to have access to the internet. And the internet is a great source for self-learning. You can literally learn almost anything online. It's great. So in summation of the first part of this mental model, there's 2 things, your inputs and quality. You want to keep in mind where your inputs are coming from, what sources they're coming from, and then use critical thinking to quality control what's coming into your mind. Part 2 of my mental model here for information theory is storage and distribution. And I gotta say, we're super lucky these days to have what we have. The amount of information we can store and the way we can distribute it is the best it's ever been in documented history. It literally blows my mind that there is so much information available out there and how easily accessible it is if you have access to the internet. And if we go back in time a bit, word of mouth used to be the primary means for information communication, and our storage, well, that was our memories. And this was imperfect, as you know, playing a game of telephone. The information distribution is slow to scale through your network. And I don't know about you, but my memory is not perfect, and I forget a lot of things. So the storage hasn't been that great either. So then along came the use of symbols and art and pictures and things like caves, and then ink on parchment paper. We finally had a way of storing our information in our languages, our pictures, our symbols, on something else. And as long as it doesn't get damaged or washed away or lost, it's stored. And as long as someone can decode your symbols, it's available to them. I mean, in my view, this was a game changer. As soon as humans could store information and pass it along, we started to get ahead. We got the information advantage. And then after all that, we had the invention of the printing press, which allowed mass distribution of the same thing. Amazing. We could get a vast amount of information copied to tons of different people. The distribution on that is insane. I mean, if you were to chart humans' ability to store and distribute information over time, it's probably something like this, and then like that. One technology led into another, which led into another, which led into another, and we've gone through this exponential informational growth. Before all of this, information were in silos in our brains, and now we can share them. I mean, it's so great that I can share this with you right now. And of course, even with all this modern technology of storage and distribution, we have a lot of information issues. Information silos are still a thing, and we do our best to break them down because they don't work. So where we're at so far is we have our inputs, which we're quality control checking, and then we're storing that information in our brain or on our computer or wherever the case may be. And then finally, we're distributing it out. As humans have gotten better at all of those steps over time, we've gotten that information advantage over different species, I think. Now we're at the last part here, part 3, which is processing and computing. In our inputs, we've quality controlled it a bit, we've stored it, we distributed it, and now we're at the processing and computing step. Information can eventually become knowledge, but it needs to be processed first. And part of that still is quality control. Generally, information is processed in the search for knowledge. Sometimes this is called looking for signal amongst all of the noise, which are all your distractions and misinformation. Just by being a human, you're processing information constantly as it's coming in through your senses. Some of this happens consciously, and parts of it happen unconsciously. In fact, a big part of the brain's job is telling you what you should focus your attention on. The senses are overloaded every day, and so it is really important that your brain is able to process what is important. And that brings us to part 3, which is processing and computing. Information can eventually turn into knowledge once it's been processed. This is sometimes called looking for signal amongst all of the noise, which is the misinformation and distraction. We want more signal and less noise. All living beings are constantly processing the information brought in through their senses. If you're a human, some of this is happening consciously, and parts of it are also happening unconsciously. In fact, part of the brain's job is to tell you what to focus in on with your attention. The senses are overloaded with information every day, and so it's really important for the brain to tell you where you need to draw your attention. This is where computers come into play, and they form an all-new information advantage. Because if you can make something an information problem, you can solve it with information technology. A computer's ability to process information, while different than a human, could be far greater. After all, they can run 24/7 and do exactly what you want them to do. But where computers fall short is, generally at the moment anyways, on the intelligence piece. And that's the decision-making piece. But this is slowly changing with advances in artificial intelligence and also eventually quantum computing. And I think this is why you see a lot of interest and regulation and almost like a AI race to get to artificial intelligence, because that's gonna be the next advantage. At the end of the day, the purpose of processing and computing information is in the search for knowledge and looking for that information advantage. There are 2 more parts to my mental model around information theory, which I'll be diving into in my next video. So make sure you subscribe to check that one out. Thanks for watching. That's the video. Leave a comment below on how you would simplify your worldview. I'm very curious. And as always, I appreciate you.